Oh, I'm so done talking about this stupid movie, but I did promise I'd eventually get around to finish talking about it. So here we go. We're gonna wrap up everything about Godzilla 2014, and I'll finally be free of this bland, forgettable piece of shit film. So the first thing we're gonna talk about is the music. So when I think about music in movies, there are two main criteria that I always look at. Number one, how memorable the music is, and number two, how well it enhances the emotions of the film. If something is magical and happens to hit both of these, like say the music in the original Star Wars trilogy or the music in the Godzilla films, the original Godzilla films, mind you, that's both memorable and enhances the emotions. It's incredible. Like the original Godzilla 1954, it enhances that grim tone while also being memorable. Who doesn't know all the themes from that movie? Or Terror of Mechagodzilla, it enhances that more of a grim tone as opposed to the goofiness of the other 70s movies. The psychedelic feel of Godzilla vs. Hedorah, that amplifies the goofiness of that movie. It all works and feels coherent. Godzilla 2014, the music is not memorable at all. As I've mentioned previously, most of the soundtrack just is that kind of thing you hear in trailers nowadays when the screen goes dark. It's really bland. I don't think it fits with the film at all. And for the second criteria, enhancing emotions, there are no emotions in the film from any of the main characters, aside from Joe Brody, but we'll get to him in a second. So aside from that first scene in the nuclear reactor where Joe Brody loses his wife, the music really doesn't enhance any emotions because Ford Brody doesn't have emotions, Ken Watanabe doesn't have emotions, none of these other characters ever display any emotion, or nor is there any present in the atmosphere of the scenes or what's going on. So I can't really blame the music for that. That's more of the writing. So it makes sense that they just had to come up with something generic. Um, with characters, we're gonna move on to the next section. Just get this over with. So all the characters are just bland, emotionless pieces of cardboard. It's almost terrible, with the exception of two, but we'll get to them. So the movie only really focuses on Ford Brody. As a lot of people know, Godzilla's barely in the movie. It's more of a human drama. I don't have a problem with a Godzilla film being a human drama. That could work if done right, is the key. The problem is Ford Brody has no character arc and shows no emotion and has no character development, which makes absolutely no sense in a film that focuses on a human character. I can give examples of human characters done well in other Godzilla movies. For example, you have Shinoda in Godzilla 2000. He's not the same character throughout the entire movie. Tuji Mori from Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. The fact I'm mentioning that piece of crap, even that can get it done. That's incredible. You got Ozaki from Godzilla Final Wars. Think about Ozaki. In the beginning, he just wants to fight. I'm a mutant or whatever. Then towards the middle, he realizes it's not just about fighting and everything. And in the end, he finally realizes his true power and takes out all the bad guys, the Exilians. So that's my point. Over the three arcs or the three acts of a movie, your main character should have an arc. That's what keeps them engaging as you follow them on their transformative journey. Ford Brody has no transformative journey, nor does he ever really transform. He just kind of sits there with a mild concerned look on his face, with no emotions, nothing interesting to say. He just spits out expository dialogue. It's really disgusting. Now, I guess they were trying to go for something where the human element is supposed to mirror the monster elements and kind of run like a parallel symbolism. A film that did this really well was Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, arguably one of the most underrated Godzilla films. Akane is representative of Mechagodzilla and the way the two tie together. Mechagodzilla is the skeleton of the old Godzilla. It should have just been left to die and buried. Akane has to make up for her mistakes when she accidentally killed, is it Kazama? No, Kazama's in Final Wars. Whatever his name is, the other fighter pilot, she kills her brother, and she should have died fighting Godzilla in the beginning, but now she is essentially living after death, the same as Mechagodzilla, And it's really sweet when the two of them pair up together, and it feels like emotional accomplishment. The way that Akane has to work back from being at the lowest point, build herself back up, and even then, she still makes a mistake halfway through when Mechagodzilla goes haywire, but she handles it very nicely. She even gets out and rescues the guy that keeps bullying her and wants her dead. That was a nice little arc, and by the end of the movie, she completely realizes what she has to do, who she is, and the way it parallels with Mechagodzilla is incredible, and that the two of them come together and fight while she's inside Mechagodzilla. It's just the way the story, the emotions, and the characters are all tied together. Absolutely fantastic in that movie. Ford Brody has none of that. He doesn't parallel any of the monsters. And the biggest problem is he never changes throughout the movie. So as I said, throughout the 3 acts, he does not change at all. In the first act, he just wants to find his family. In the second act, he just wants to find his family. And in the third act, he just wants to find his family. So that's not even like a character trait. That's just his motivation. That's all we have about this character. It's awful. I don't even know what to say about Ford Brody. What they should have done better is you need a different starting place. Instead of starting off with the utopia, everything's great, he's got a wife and a kid, everyone loves each other, start off in a darker place. That way when he gets to the end of his journey and the family's reunited, it feels earned and accomplished. Start off with him coming home from the military after the 15 years scene. Comes home, his child, the one child he had, died of a medical complication of some sort. His wife's been cheating on him because military wife. She's had a few miscarriages. That's what you need to start off with. He's starting in this dark place. That way, he moves from this dark place into a lighter place by the end of the film. That's called character growth, which the film, as is, does not have. Now, you actually could make a story that works around that. For example, in the style of Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, where the human element parallels the monster element, you could have it that all Ford Brody is really trying to do is start up a family, but between medical complications, miscarriages, his wife cheating on him, he's like, well, fuck this, and just completely becomes ruined by it. Then the rest of the movie proceeds as is, whatever. And then that would make that scene where he's looking at the Muto eggs, you could have one of them hatch in front of him and he sees the child. Or there's like a shot in the background where he sees the Muto tending to the child and he realizes that himself and the Muto, despite being viewed as monsters by the other, are just trying to have a family and get everything set up. Kind of like the original Rodan film. The only problem with that is, how does Godzilla fit into any of that? And that's exactly my point. So I guess if you really look at it, this could have been a good remake of Rodan, as is. But they didn't do that because this is a Godzilla film, even though they forgot that you have to establish Godzilla in some way. I've ranted enough about sharing Godzilla and trying to get him all set up or whatever. So continuing on with characters, I think everyone's in agreement that Bryan Cranston is the only character that has any kind of emotional exposition that's set up, that has any kind of arc, which I agree. I really enjoy Bryan Cranston's performance as Joe Brody in the film. I think he does an excellent job. You can actually feel his emotions when he has to push that button, shutting the reactor door, essentially dooming his wife to save everyone else. You just feel the weight of the scene and everything, and it's just well set up. I really like that. It's probably my favorite scene in the movie, arguably the only good scene in the movie that has emotions. It's just really well done. Killing off Bryan Cranston, I don't think is a bad move per se, but it should have come in the middle or towards the end of the second act, when your main character, Ford Brody, is at his lowest point. As I said previously, he doesn't have a lowest point. He doesn't have a character arc. He just has a horizontal line as his arc throughout the whole movie. So as is, killing off Bryan Cranston really didn't have any effect on his character at all because he still wants to go find his family. So that motivation never changes. There's no change in his character by his father's deaths, and it's really disappointing. Killing off Bryan Cranston, as I mentioned, happened at, you could say right at the end of the first act, and it comes off as really surprising. I don't know if this is like the origin of subverting expectations or whatever, making you think that you're gonna watch a film about an established character and then, oh, surprise, we don't have any more established characters, we killed off the only one. It's like Gareth Edwards saw a good character trying to break through all the dull, gray, exposition-filled dialogue and emotionless characters, and he's like, alright, Brian, it's time to get you killed. God, it's terrible. But no, Bryan Cranston does a fantastic job. I think he should have been around in more of the movie. In fact, I'd argue that he should have been the main character for the entirety of the movie, and then his son Ford is the one that dies, thus changing Bryan Cranston's heart, as he's the one that's set up in the back, whatever you want to call that, flashback or whatever, the original reactor meltdown. He's the one that goes through the change, and then you could have Ford die along the way, and see how that changes Joe Brody's character and makes him realize that, you know, and it could be like he dies while trying to fight the monsters or expose the monsters or whatever, and that makes Joe realize his obsession has caused him to lose everything he loves, and so he must change his character accordingly to make sure that never happens again. Aside from Bryan Cranston, there's really no other interesting characters, or none of the actors really do a good job. I don't necessarily know if it's their fault. After seeing Rogue One and having every single character in the movie be just bland, emotionless, pointless, I want to say that's more of just Gareth Edwards' style. So I'm not necessarily going to blame Emily Olsen or Aaron Taylor-Johnson. They have done better work. Emily Olsen is great as Scarlet Witch in all the Marvel movies. For anyone that's never seen Kick-Ass, Aaron Taylor-Johnson actually can act. So I'd recommend going and seeing that if you haven't yet. It'll give you a much better perspective of him as an actor. The only other actor I thought did a decent job in the movie was Ken Watanabe, as he is one of the returning characters, I believe, in the upcoming film that comes out this week. My biggest problem, though, is that he has nothing to work with. So the Dr. Serizawa character will just show up at random to spout expositional dialogue. Now, this isn't Ken Watanabe's fault, obviously. This is the fault of the writers. It's as if they're like, oh, we have a good actor here. He might add emotion or something exciting to the film. We have to get rid of all of that by giving him only expositional dialogue. Like, who the fuck comes up with this? It's terrible. Oh my goodness. But yeah, I mentioned in the last video there's one line about midway towards the end of the second act where they're on a helicopter, and the general was talking with Dr. Serizawa, and Serizawa pulls out that stopwatch where he's like, oh, it stopped in 1945, August or September, whatever, when the atomic bomb dropped. Again, that's not putting symbolism into a film or adding a deeper meaning than what's really there, because it's not being displayed by the art. It's coming out through expositional dialogue. To reiterate what I said in the last video, Godzilla is representative of not only the atomic bomb, but the United States in general, because of the way he behaves and the way the Japanese people perceive him in that original Godzilla film, not because Godzilla says, I'm an atomic bomb. I like to rain atomic fire. Communism, bad. Oh, I guess I need to explain about the communism. So, on a little bit of a tangent here, Godzilla has always been seen as a symbol of nuclear destruction. But if looking even deeper than that, I'd argue that Godzilla is actually a symbol of Japan's view of the United States. And the way Godzilla's relationship with humankind has changed throughout the movies is really amplified by this. So, for example, in the earlier films in the 50s, Japan is still very pissed at the United States. So we're represented as just a giant monster that has to come in, try to kill them, and they have to find out some creative way to stop this. Even in that very first movie, I think the symbolism is the most prevalent, with Godzilla just sinking ships in the ocean, which America's meddling in Japan's ocean with the East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. They go out and they try and bomb him first, so essentially you have Pearl Harbor right there. He follows them all the way back, island hopping at Odo Island, and eventually reaches the heart of Japan and goes in, attacks. The moment when Godzilla is standing over, I forget what the building's called, but Japan's government building, the Capitol, he's just standing over it, about to destroy it, and there's so much symbolism in that one shot, more so than the entire 123-minute running time of Godzilla 2014. And then as Godzilla has evolved and the relationship changed, it essentially changes based on how Japan's relation with the United States has changed, which is why you see more of the mid-70s films. Godzilla is more of an ally and a good guy now as opposed to just an enemy. I think one of the funniest and probably a little bit too ham-fisted representations of this is Godzilla versus the Sea Monster, where the Japanese characters, which we'll say represent Japan, are going off to an island and they're fighting people called the Red Bamboo. Let's see. China, lots of bamboo. Red, communism. Okay. To be fair, I've heard Chinese people called much more derogatory terms than red bamboo. But you get the idea. And they're like, well, we can't fight this. So they get to wake up good old USA Godzilla to come in and just completely destroy all the communism building nuclear weapons. So yeah, there's deeper meaning even in a shit movie like that that really adds to it, and that's what really brings out Godzilla's symbolism and what's made him last so long. Accordingly, I think that's why you necessarily won't ever have an American Godzilla that works, because he does represent how Japan views the United States. That's always been how they go about making Godzilla's character. Now, if an American has to do that, we don't really understand that. So maybe it's just cultural incompetence. We don't have the perspective for whatever reason. We'll never be able to recapture that, which we don't necessarily have to, as long as you put something else in there to replace it and bring out Godzilla's symbolism and character. As I mentioned in the last video, they didn't do that well. He's not a natural disaster. He doesn't represent anything greater. In fact, it's probably the other way around, where the tidal wave does what Godzilla should be doing instead of vice versa. Now, going off the tangent, back to the characters, Ken Watanabe, Bryan Cranston, only two noteworthy actors. The fact that Ken Watanabe can still give a good performance with the awful dialogue he has is amazing. I mean, it's almost Ewan McGregor amazing. To give another comparison of characters, let's look back to everyone's hated Godzilla 98. Those characters are the biggest stereotypes ever, but being a stereotype still means you have character and personality. Nick Totopoulos is wormy, no pun intended, kind of awkward. He doesn't know how to interact with people very well. You have the military guy, I believe Sergeant Johnson or whatever. I'd have to go back and watch the cartoon. But he's all very stern, uptight, doesn't take any bullshit. You know, your stereotypical incompetent military leader. You have the wormy Dr. Craven. Elsie makes some side comments. His girlfriend Audrey is slimy, sneaky, but she changes as the film goes on and realizes that she did something wrong. The TV broadcaster guy is stereotypical sleazy boss, but being a sleazy boss still means you have a personality. So yeah, it's stereotypical, it's tired, and I'm sick of it, but it does have better. Godzilla 98 does have better characters than Godzilla 2014. Even though they're stereotypes, being a stereotype still means you have personality and some character development and growth, which is more than can be said about Godzilla 2014. Alright, I'm done with characters. It's such a stupid movie. Let's get this over with. So now we're going to move on to the story. I believe I may have mentioned in the last video that this does not feel like one cohesive narrative. This feels like two movies stitched together. And for me, the big cutoff there is when Bryan Cranston dies. Because that first act of the movie, I really enjoyed, actually. The build-up and everything. It felt like we were going somewhere. We had Bryan Cranston set up, and his son is the side character. I'm like, oh, this is great. Maybe they're going to avenge the mom. Like, where could they go with this? Bryan Cranston's emotion was there, his motivation was there. And then the end of the first act happens, and Bryan Cranston dies, and expectations subverted. You thought you were going to watch a good, wholesome movie with a complete narrative and a cohesive story. Surprise! I'm not going to give you anything close to that, because I'm Gareth Edwards. So those other two acts feel like a completely different movie, and it just all goes downhill from there. And keep in mind, Godzilla hasn't even showed up in the film to this point. So they subvert your expectations, I guess, there by instead of Godzilla hatching out of the thing, it's a Muto, and you're like, wait, why isn't Godzilla in a Godzilla movie at this point? And then Bryan Cranston dies, and you're like, wow, I'm completely lost at where this is going to go. It's like in Star Wars: The Last Jedi, you kill Emperor Snoke. Oh, Rey and Kylo Ren are gonna team up. Where's this gonna go? Oh, never mind. They're not gonna do that. It's just good guys versus bad guys again with no change or development. So yeah, avoiding bland stuff like that is always a plus. And Godzilla 2014 didn't do that. Right after Bryan Cranston dies, as I mentioned earlier, Ford Brody has no character change, no motivation change after losing essentially part of the only family he has left, which really just kind of hinders the whole death with Bryan Cranston. As I mentioned earlier, it's completely pointless. There's no reason for it to exist whatsoever in the film. Ford Brody should have been the one that died. That would have had an impact on Bryan Cranston's character and just been much better. Oh, it's awful. You know what actually film I would compare this to, now that we're talking about story? Avatar: The Last Airbender, where, hear me out, where throughout the whole film, there's not a single mention of emotion or anything. It's just jumping around to random locations without any kind of character development. Characters' dialogue is exclusively expositional, where they're just talking about backstory or whatever, or saying, well, this is this because this, or just explaining things. I'm so done with it. That's not how you write movies. I need to know what the characters' personalities are, how they change throughout the film, what their emotions are, how they interact with other characters. It can't be that hard. It's like story writing 101. Children's books can do this. Oh, but I would definitely think that's comparable. The entire last two acts of the movie, as I've said, they're just boring, and they lead into my next theme, which is build up leads to disappointment. So this is a theme that's present throughout the two different movies stitched together, both the first act and the two later acts. So this overarching theme, let's talk about it. Bryan Cranston, you have this whole build up, everything's going great in the film. You're building up, they have to go to the original nuclear reactor site. There is something going on there with monsters and everything. We go in, it's not Godzilla, and you're like, wait, what? So all that build up, I thought done fantastically. The build up was great. Bryan Cranston, how he developed up to that point, why his character's doing it, you understand all of that. I don't know why Ford Brody came along. He's my dad or whatever. We don't know if he cares about his dad or whatever. It's never made clear in the movie. There's that one scene between them in Joe Brody's little apartment, I guess, where he just feels like, I'm done with this. Just move on, Dad, which is really just exemplifies why Ford Brody should have been the side character. He represents having moved on from the disaster 15 years ago, while Joe Brody's character represents not having moved on from the disaster, and having those two opposites interact with each other would have been great. And ultimately, having Ford Brody die, being the one that hasn't moved on to it, will complete Joe Brody's story arc by making him realize, oh, I've lost my son because I wasn't able to move on from this or whatever, and I could have just lived a happy life. And there you go. You have a character arc right there. All I had to do was say like one sentence, and people in Hollywood with $144 million couldn't think of that. Absolutely pathetic. So continuing on with the theme of build-up leads to disappointment. I don't really want to reiterate too much on Godzilla's screen time here. I think I mentioned in the last video, my problem isn't that Godzilla has low screen time. My problem is the screen time he does have is either spent roaring into the camera, wincing in pain from being shot at the military. Since when does Godzilla get hurt by tanks? Like, what the fuck? Or just walking away off camera. None of that establishes Godzilla's character. If you look at other films where he has less screen time, he's either fighting other monsters, destroying buildings. Look at the original Godzilla. He doesn't have too much screen time, but what his screen time is spent doing is murdering people, stepping on trains, biting towers and knocking them over, setting people on fire with his atomic breath. The one shot where he just breathes fire onto the one city block with all the people running down it, and there's a scream and it just bursts into flames. Absolutely incredible. The symbolism comes out there. Godzilla's motivation and personality comes out there. How he acts. It's just incredible. From like a 7-second shot, you get all of that. And nothing like that comes out in Godzilla 2014. So I know everyone's complained about the build up to the big monster fight. Godzilla's first appearance, awesome in the airport. As I said, cuts away really awkwardly, shows like found footage. Can we just be done with found footage? It has no place in any movie. Maybe for like a shitty horror movie, but a kaiju movie where I think I mentioned in the last one, that style of horror does not work. It should not be present in a Godzilla film. Godzilla's not scary because he's going to come out from behind a bush and go, boo! He's scary because he can literally destroy everything. But again, that's buildup that leads to disappointment. Now, a lot of people have counter-argued that, well, you can't have a big monster fight halfway through the movie because then you're not going to have anything left for the end of the movie and have a boring climax. A good example of this would be Godzilla Raids Again, where towards in the latter half of the second act, spoiler, Godzilla kills Anguirus, and that third act of Godzilla Raids Again really drags on, where they're in Hokkaido and Godzilla's on the ice island and they just have to keep bombing it. It's just, the movie completely goes downhill after that point, so you don't want to blow your cards too early, but of course, you don't have to. There are ways to include a little monster fight without blowing the whole deck. And of being 29 films in now, Godzilla, of course, has plenty of examples. So I'm mainly going to reference the Mechagodzilla movies. You look at Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, the original. There's that fight halfway through in the industrial park, great lighting, it's nice orange tone to all the buildings and everything, almost like a Twilight feel. They don't blow everything, they don't show you all of Mechagodzilla's moves. It's a real short fight. Short and sweet, that's the kind of thing we needed. And at the end of the movie, it's completely over the top, just boom, 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 Mechagodzilla unleashes his full arsenal, and you get a feel of everything and see just how powerful the monsters are. That's a great way to do it. We'll call this monster pacing. Another example, Terror of Mechagodzilla, the direct sequel. Godzilla fights Titanosaurus halfway through the film, and it lasts maybe 11 seconds, and of course it's cutting back. I like this one because it cuts back and forth between the monster element and the human element, where they're trying to chase down, oh, whatever her name is, Katsura. Can't believe I just pulled that out of thin air. But that's my point. Godzilla 2014 could have worked where you're cutting back and forth between monster element and human element. It just has to be paced properly, and you have to deliver on both ends. So having Godzilla walk towards a Muto and then cut away before he actually does anything, that's not how you do it. We need to see him go up, hit the Muto or something, initiate the fight, and then cut away. Kind of like, as I said, in Terror of Mechagodzilla. That standoff between Godzilla and Titanosaurus, where the camera's scrolling around, absolutely fantastic shot. I think it's one of the most iconic shots in any Godzilla movie. And then they come together and they start punching. You can clearly see what's going on with the monsters. It's not all muddled and washed out with all the gray tones. Absolutely fantastic, well lit, fits in with the emotion of the movie. Titanosaurus like hits Godzilla in the torso with the chest, or in the torso with his head, and then it cuts back to the human element. Perfect. And then after Katsura gets shot and falls off the cliff, cuts back to the monster, Titanosaurus gives up. So the way it goes back and forth between the human element and the monster element is just flawless. And keep in mind, this is only halfway through the movie, working with like 12 seconds of monster screen time. That's all it needs to be. It doesn't have to be big over the top. Now, start that build-up back over again, building up to the top. The final battle of Terror of Mechagodzilla is amazing. You've got Mechagodzilla, you've got Titanosaurus. Godzilla's trying to fight them both. It has its highs and its lows, where Godzilla gets buried underground and seems to be defeated. But then he comes out, he ends up winning the day with the help of humankind, and woo, fantastic. And it feels earned at that point because Godzilla struggled early on in the fight, seeing him overcome the challenge really brings the audience into it and makes you feel like, yeah, Godzilla really had to fight hard to earn that victory. You don't really feel that in 2014 at all. As I've said, it's really wonky cutting between. It doesn't really cut between the monster elements and the human elements. It'll show like a second of Godzilla, and then it doesn't cut. It just kind of scrolls down or like pans down, and you see Ford Brody running. He's not doing anything interesting. He's not doing anything character-wise. It's completely pointless. We call it monster pacing is just absolutely atrocious. And Terror of Mechagodzilla, I guess, isn't quite as good of an example as could be, because none of the characters aside from Katsura really have any development. So we're gonna go back to the most underrated Godzilla film, Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. Godzilla appears a total of 3 times in this entire movie. He appears once at the beginning to establish his character. He destroys buildings, he gets shot at by the military, he fights back. Even just looking at Godzilla's face in that movie, you know what he's all about. When Akane shoots him with the mazer, it does nothing, and Godzilla just kind of looks down, growling, that menacing look on his face. You know what Godzilla's all about. He is here to fuck you up. And again, didn't even need to do anything, didn't need to fight, didn't need to destroy buildings. You get Godzilla's entire character from one shot. I guess you can attribute that more to the bland design of 2014 and how, as I said in the last video, his face doesn't give any indication to what his character is or anything. It's just completely bland. That's just an awful way to do it. Going back to Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, halfway through the film, again, you have a short little fight between Godzilla and Mechagodzilla. It lasts maybe 30 seconds. And it cuts beautifully between the monster action and the human action. The commander's like, Akane, let's do this. And she starts by attacking Godzilla, does some weapons. Godzilla backs up, cuts back to the humans. Akane, finish this. Then she's activating Absolute Zero, whatever. Cut again. Godzilla does the roar with Kyu, and it has that awesome little thing where it like zooms in on the eye and goes through the Godzilla history, and it realizes that it once was Godzilla. And then cuts back to Akane, can't activate. That's monster pacing. Executed very well in that film. And then Mechagodzilla runs wild, destroys stuff, and it acts like the original Godzilla. Isn't that funny? Mechagodzilla acts more like Godzilla than Godzilla 2014 does. That's just sad. And then going back to the movie, you get to the third act. Now, we've only had like maybe a minute, 2 minutes of Godzilla time in the film so far, and what he has done, he's fought Kyu, turned Kyu evil by doing a roar. He's attacked people, destroyed buildings, attacked the military, he's murdered people, and it all fits in. There's a nice funeral scene in the beginning that really amplifies the aftermath of Godzilla, also helps bring out those themes. And then in this third act, they're rushing to get Mechagodzilla to fight Godzilla because government commentary or whatever, that's common in Godzilla films. Government commentary, Kyu comes, Godzilla, this is one of my favorite scenes and also helps set up Godzilla's character. He's about to launch his atomic breath at a goddamn hospital. You see the nurse carrying an infant, and Godzilla's just about to light this place up. If you didn't think he was a bad guy before, you really get a sense of it right there. And the nice build-up dramatic moment when Kyu comes in, slams Godzilla to the side. That's build-up with good payoff, because you understand what's going on, emotions are all there, tone is there, Godzilla's personality is there, so that way when Kyu knocks him over, it feels accomplished. You just prevented this evil monster, per se, from just completely murdering all these people. And then the people, they show a shot of them getting away and being like, oh, that's Kyu, that's the good one. And that kind of finishes Kyu's arc, because people throughout the film have mixed feelings on Kyu. Again, parallels Akane. There are people that think, oh, she can still do well, and there's like the brother of the soldier she accidentally got killed, where it's like, oh, she's never gonna do good. We can't use it. It's awful. So seeing that parallel between monster and human character Absolutely fantastic, really artistic, very well executed. In Godzilla 2014, so it's been building up. You are now, and that was only a 90-minute film, mind you, with Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. Not even, I think it's like 86. So now going into Godzilla 2014, you have 2 hours worth. Godzilla doesn't appear until over an hour into the film. Just terrible. Like, in the other movie, Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, applicable because it's a versus movie, he appears right away, he establishes his character, that's all done, right from the first few shots. Fantastic. In Godzilla 2014, as I said in the last video, he's not established, his design doesn't tell you what he's about, you don't notice, he doesn't have any symbolism, he doesn't have any personality, he's just represented as a giant dinosaur chasing his dinner. Just a dumb animal. Which is so frustrating because all that symbolism is what sets Godzilla apart from like the beast from 20,000 Fathoms or the monster that challenged the world, the giant claw, any of those other generic 1950s monsters movies. They're just that's pretty much the level Godzilla's brought down to. It's embarrassing to say the least. But so again, they start building up again in 2014, being like, oh, we're gonna build up to this final fight. And the monster pacing in the final fight, as I mentioned, is terrible. There's that one shot where the soldiers are running around, and then Godzilla shows, or they're in like Chinatown, and then Godzilla shows up through a veil of smoke and roars into the camera for what feels like it has to be at least like a 20 to 30 second shot where he's just pointlessly roaring into the camera. And I remember feeling embarrassed. I'm like, he just did this when he first appeared. What is the point of this shot? This is meaningless. Like, why is this in the film? And then I guess he goes to attack the Muto or wherever, but you don't know because after the roar's done, the camera just shifts down back to Ford Brody being boring and running around doing expositional stuff. It's so terrible. So continuing, the monster pacing, as I said, is really bad. It does not effectively cut between human elements and monster elements. It's also hindered by the fact that Ford Brody has no character. He has no parallel to the monsters in terms of symbolism, emotion, or anything. So it all feels kind of wonky, whereas in Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, Akane and Mechagodzilla run parallel. They have a clear evil to destroy, which is Godzilla, which has been established in the film earlier on, and now it's all coming together. That's the way you wrap up a movie. All that build up in that film leads to the final battle, and when Akane and Mechagodzilla triumph over Godzilla through all their struggles, you feel awesome about it. Even though they didn't kill Godzilla, you were there throughout every moment of their struggle, and their victory feels earned. Nothing in Godzilla 2014 is earned whatsoever. Godzilla just keeps getting hurt by the Mutos. The monster pacing is awful. It'll be like 2 seconds of Godzilla, and you can't even tell what he's doing. The cinematography is awful. The lighting is terrible. Everything looks so gray and muddled, and you can't see what's going on the screen. Even in Godzilla 1954, I think what they were trying to do with the bland cinematography and lighting, they were trying to make it look like it was black and white, like the older film. Many Godzilla fans feel like that black and white style really amplifies the tone, that grim tone of the original Godzilla film, which I agree, I think it does. It feels like you're watching old not found footage, I don't want to use that term, but like you found an old film reel hidden in like your veteran grandpa's basement, and it shows this historical event of how this giant monster came to Japan back in the 50s and just completely destroyed the place, and the tone and everything, the grimness, how they feel like they can't stop it. Fantastic. That doesn't really work in Godzilla 2014 because, again, Godzilla's not established. There is no clear tone in the movie. Everything's kind of serious, but it comes off more as like a bland serious, not like, oh, these characters are focused. We know what we need to do. We have our personalities. It just comes off as really bland and gray, and it's kind of like if you order a burger at like a fast food place or just anywhere, you ask for it rare, and instead of coming out red, it comes out that nice muddled gray color. That's Godzilla 2014, pretty much. Great, nasty-ass burger. But all that buildup leads to nothing, as I've said. Godzilla mostly gets hurt in the fight with the Mutos, aside from the two finishing moves where he uses the tail slap on the one Muto and has his stupid blue piss atomic breath into the other one. Only two shots where anything Godzilla really happens in the movie relating to Godzilla. It's just completely bland. You need to have better monster pacing if you're gonna make a Godzilla versus movie, or better yet, if you're just trying to establish Godzilla, which this film couldn't do. Get rid of the Mutos. Just have a Godzilla origin story. If you're really going for the cinematic universe feel, whether this is a standalone film or an origin story in just a small piece of this larger puzzle of cinematic universe, as I said in the last video, your overall goal is to establish Godzilla, regardless of which of those two perspectives you're taking with this film. This film does neither. It doesn't establish Godzilla in any way, so it doesn't work as a standalone film, does not work as an origin story in the Godzilla cinematic universe, or whatever the hell they're calling it nowadays. It just does not work. And if you do have to have it be a versus movie, you have so much material to use. Watch any of the Godzilla versus movies. Well, not any of them, but a lot of them, especially the ones I just named, all have great monster pacing, where it perfectly cuts between monster action, human elements, it flows perfectly, and you're satisfied, as opposed to Godzilla 2014, where it just abruptly cuts away from the monsters before anything is developed or happens, and the human elements that it cuts to are bland, emotionless, pointless, and have no emotion. It's just all about bland exposition. I'm so done with saying the word bland. I hate this movie so much. I just want to be done talking about it. So we're also going to go into the tone a little bit, now that we've discussed monster pacing. As I mentioned with the lighting and the cinematography, it's all just bland. There's a few good shots. Cinematography, I think I mentioned in the last video, Godzilla's first appearance. Absolutely fantastic. The shot where the camera is on his leg and scrolls up. It reminds me of probably my favorite shot ever of Godzilla. It's a shot from Godzilla 85, or The Return of Godzilla, for those that don't have the old VHS, where Godzilla just made his first appearance at the nuclear power plant. There's some like electrical towers and like high tension poles in the foreground, and Godzilla's just completely silhouetted. It's told from the ground's view up, so it feels like just this towering behemoth is walking towards you. And he looks so menacing and evil. Again, like 3-second shot establishes everything you need to know about Godzilla. What he's about. He's here to screw you over. You know what his personality is. You know what his goals are. Just from 3 seconds they could do that. And in Godzilla 2014, with 8 minutes of screen time, you couldn't do that. What other films have done in just seconds? 3 seconds in Godzilla 85, 3 seconds in Terror of Mechagodzilla. He didn't even have to do it. Just looking at the design of Godzilla and the facial expression he makes, you know what he's about. So you can't have a bland, emotionless, pointless Godzilla if you're going to make a Godzilla film work. Which, I don't know, Gareth Edwards, maybe it was the Tuxedo executives above him pulling some strings, but it just does not work at all. So as I mentioned with the tone is trying to be serious, but that really has to be matched by the emotions of the characters, and as I said, they don't have any emotions, so the tone really comes off as bland. There's that word again. There's one weird clash. It's towards the end of the second act, start of the third act, where, what's his name? Ford's trying to get back to the San Francisco area. He's like, come on, Sarge, let me go on the train. None of your guys know how to handle, like, an analog nuclear bomb or whatever. And he's like, oh, yeah? And then talks to some random soldier. He's like, hey, pointy end, or aim the pointy end at the monsters, right, Sarge? And it just, I guess that was supposed to be a joke, but it feels so out of place in the seriousness of the Godzilla movie. I can't really give it a pass because we don't know who this character is. Is he supposed to be a silly or funny guy? I don't think he even got a name in the movie. And then he dies on the bridge later. So completely pointless character, didn't need to be in the film. Random joke that just kind of clashes with the tone of the movie because it's something more than just blandness. Oh, it's so awful. Oh, and most importantly, throughout all those scenes, as I've said with the Godzilla 1954 stuff, you can see what's on the screen with all that emotional stuff. It's just, 54 is done so much better. That scene where Godzilla or the train runs into him, he throws a car, he fucking steps on a car, and it's just a nice low angle and just bam, and you see it just completely get crushed. With the people screaming and everything, you can clearly see what's going on, even though it's night out and it's a black and white film. Every texture is realized. You can see everything that's on the screen and what's happening. All just very well executed in those short few seconds. Just perfect. An 123-minute movie couldn't capture any of that. Just terrible. Alright, so I think I've just talked enough about this movie. It's so terrible. I really don't want to talk about it anymore. So I think I'm just going to make this the end of it. But before that, we're going to talk about what's next with the Godzilla franchise, at least in the American Godzilla cinematic universe, whatever the hell they want to call it. So as I've mentioned previously in this video and in the last video, this film does not work as a standalone film or as an origin story in a cinematic universe because the most important piece, Godzilla, was not established, nor were any of the human characters established or what their personalities or motivations are like. All we got was characters that spit out expositional dialogue. So in order to make a cinematic universe work, you need to plan in advance. The biggest example is Marvel's phase design. They have the movie at the end, which is the Avengers, and then all the little side movies that all build up to that. And they plan out a whole phase at once. That's one phase. No one else seems to be doing the same thing. The DC movies just come out in a completely scattered order. They don't feel like they're building up to anything. They have no phases. The Dark Monster universe, well, that died before it even got started, so I guess that's a bad example. Everyone's trying to do these cinematic universes. This Godzilla one, it couldn't establish anything with Godzilla, and I don't know, did they really plan out these movies? It's hard to say, because I know they wanted to have a cinematic universe while they were building Godzilla, because it came out in the wake of Avengers, that first Avengers movie. But it does not feel like they sat down and wrote all three movies together, plus Kong Skull Island. It feels like Gareth Edwards, which he said he wanted this to be like a separate thing. He wanted it to work as just one movie. It does not. It doesn't work as a movie. It doesn't work as a cinematic universe. Nothing's explained or whatever. You have to plan in a cinematic universe, or even just in movies that are going to come out in like a sequence. Otherwise, you get the Last Jedi problem, where you have all these things set up in a first movie, and then the second movie, oh, nope, we're just not going to have any character development, no plot developments, no character growth. We're just pushing that big old reset button, and so that pretty much concludes everything I have to say about this awful piece of shit Godzilla movie. You know what I just realized? Today's Tuesday. In 2 days, Godzilla 2019, or my bad, Godzilla King of the Monsters rolls into theaters. I plan on going to the midnight premiere. We'll see what happens. I might post a first reaction video. We'll see. I guess it depends on how I'm feeling. I might even make a separate video talking about the trailer and everything and how I feel. Maybe I'll even do a short little King Kong video about Skull Island. I completely forgot that happened. Yeah, so I will see you all later.